Narito ang programang totoong-totoo, Tambayan sa DWIZ. Programang magliliwanag ng ilang mahahalagang mga issue. Tambayan sa DWIZ. At ngayon, narito na sila upang maghatid ng saya sa bawat Pilipino. Sa programang Tambayan sa DWIZ.
Good afternoon, Kuya Winner, and good afternoon, Atty. Ahmed.
Okay, good afternoon din sa inyong lahat. Viewers dyan, kumusta? Narinig ba tayo? Maayos po yung sound?
Sana maayos ang sound natin this time, Kuya Winner, and sa ating mga listeners, pasensya na kung sa simula, kakaroon kami ng technical adjustments sa audio dahil outside na naman kami ng Atty. Ahmed. Obviously, nandito kami sa isang bagong project na pinamumunuan ng ating kagalang-galang Mr. Osa, hindi ng attorney.
Kagalang-galang po.
Anyway, hindi yan yung pag-uusapan natin.
Bago ang lahat, congratulations Attorney Trixie, kasama natin dito sa Luminos at saka dito sa DWIZ Tambayan at sa Karambola.
Para sa mga hindi nakakalam, bakit attorney?
Na-appoint yata siya ng ano ba yun? At may training-verse. Yun ba yun? Kaya ano ba yung appointment niya?
Sabi sa balita, no? Sabi sa mga, grapevine, from the grapevines. So, narinig natin na magiging secretary ng PCO.
Secretary, press secretary ba tawag ba?
Kung yun yung dating opisyal na posisyon na inuhold ni kagalang-galing Monday. Tama?
Pero at that time kasi, there was no PCO.
Yeah.
There was no PCO.
Kasi there is a press secretary and there is a PCO. Tama?
Oo nga.
Alam ko ni Kinoy, nagkaroon ng ng station. Ginawa niya na pwesto para kay Karandang. Karandang was holding the PCO part and then somebody else was holding the press secretary position. And ang laging dyan is, itong press secretary is the one in charge of the daily communications. The PCO handles yung communication arm business.
Yes.
The methods for communication, like the printing, the broadcasting, government-owned,
of the office of the president.
Under the office of the president, of course, kasi like PBB po, ang handles na. Diba?
So, yung PIA, yung RTVM, ang TV na.
Yes. So, yung production side and technical side. So, making the whole communications arm run is the work of the PCO and the secretary is the content.
Pero now I think that it's been blurred. For example, si President Duterte does his own PR. He's a spokesperson name. He doesn't use, most of the time, he doesn't use a spokesperson. Pero there is sa akin meron akong marang medyo confusion kasi is the PCO, sabihin natin yung spokesperson, whether or not it's the PCO secretary or the press secretary, meron ba siyang karapatan na sumagot in behalf of the president? Diba?
Itong nakaraang administration, itong current administration, yung ongoing administration, in the recent past, napansin natin na pinapaubayan niya sa kanya spokesperson like si Harry Roque. So yun yung tumatayong official na mouthpiece ng presidente.
In other words, meron mo ng opinion ng presidente, halimbawa if there is a question or an issue, dapat pakita niyo muna and then he says his opinion to the spokesperson and then the spokesperson says it to the public. Because halimbawa, marami kasi yung media, persons, reporters, pag nagtanong sila, ano pong masasabi ng presidente tungkol dito? Ano pong masasabi? In other words, magbibigay pa lang ng opinion on a new issue, on a new question, and they asked the PCO or the spokesperson about it. I think, in my opinion, walang power ang PCO secretary or anybody else to answer for the president. And media people should have that in mind na make sure na tanong mo ay na-communicate na sa presidente, in this case, sa Pangulo, ang principal, at nakapagbigay na siya ng opinion na to the spokesperson. Hindi yung bagong issue, para naman sa spokesperson. Ano masasabi ng presidente dito? I don't think that is proper.
And if you may notice, yung mga naging PCO secretary like si Karandang, si Martin Andanar, you will barely get them on speaking on behalf of the president. Right? But si Martin Andanar became vocal, being at the center of communication during the COVID response. Bilang secretary, you will notice he was not speaking on behalf of the president. He was acting like a neutral person, coordinating information from the various agencies.
And then talking about communication as a function of government, not necessarily as the microphone of the president.
Correct. So, ang trabaho ng PCO para sa akin sa simple yung pagkakaintindi, this is more of on the production side. No, yung
administration.
So, kung sa pagpapatakbo ng radio or TV station ang pag-uusapan natin sa isang media company, itong trabaho ng PCO for the operations. Hindi siya yung nasa content.
Hindi siya yung talent.
Hindi siya sa mga talent management. Yung pagpuproduce ng content, trabaho ng iba.
Yes.
Ang trabaho ng PCO is to make sure that whatever is the content that is produced by the government agencies ay magkakaroon channels for delivery.
That's right. And then more importantly, I think the reason for the creation of the PCO as an office, I think, for its retention, para patuloy siya under the new presidency, is that it must have the discretion to create and to come up with policies in relation to how communication now functions in government, in society, because the kind of content of communication that is handled by the PCO is very important. Because that is the communication between the sovereign people and its representative, the president. And this kind of communication is important because it is the agent that talks to the principals, the people. And if there's a problem in that system, it will break down, especially now na vulnerable ang channels natin of communication to really bad things like fake news, like hacking and all that. That is, I think, one of the more functions of the PCO if it must be retained, which it will be because there is a secretary for that now, and this Attorney Pixie. And I think that she is credible and she is capable of handling both functions that we talked about. Yeah, I think so.
The creation of this topic happened during the term of Noynoy Aquino. Before Noynoy became president, there was no such thing as presidential communications, whatever is the other O, okay? And then, kumbaga, the need to centralize the functions or to segregate the functions of the press secretary. Kasi dati, hawak ng press secretary lahat yan.
Pati yung operations mo.
Ito yung magkikita natin isang peculiar na aspect ng ating gobyerno dito sa Pilipinas. Looking at other democracies, mature democracies, merong mga government-owned stations and communications facilities. Like in the Philippines, you have the BBC, diba? Pero it's a semi-private, pero mostly government-funded na entity. The US government of America, they're used to communicate outside of their country, not inside. Okay? Now, this only shows yung necessity ng pag-maintain ng ganitong sistema only shows na ang ating media media and main media market dito sa Pilipinas is immature na to state na magkaroon siya ng fair and ample na coverage na tamang government
communication
positions and government announcements na kaya ng programa na ito. So, para matugunan yung kulangan ng private entities na engage in media to help government communicate its policies or its programs, kinakailangan na mag-operate ang gobyerno ng similar na outfits. Kasi ideally dapat walang role ng gobyerno sa pagpapatakbo ng isang radio station or TV station.
Yes, but for the purpose
ideal democratic system.
But for the purpose of communicating properly, its content to the sovereign people, it has no choice. It has no choice but to undertake it itself, diba? Undertake the activity by the government itself. Kasi for example, ang problema kasi sa ganyan, when the government undertakes communication to the public itself, is that mostly may accusation of bias or propaganda and all that, which is happens to anyone at all anyway. Kung ikaw ang maging PR ng sarili mo, ay pagdududahan ka talagang biased na. But to balance that out is to understand that everyone really is inherently biased about himself or about certain things that are parts of this value system. So it equalizes later on yung mga biases na ganyan. Ang mahirap tingnan is when the government itself undertakes the pure function of communication and media, and the completely private entities that are doing the same. Kasi now, they are both at the ends of the spectrum, and they can actually be very biased against each other, and nobody is listening anymore. Because the sovereign people are caught in a crossfire of one media entity, which is private and business, and another media entity, which is a government and public function, is hurling accusations at each other that each one is fake.
Yeah.
Fake news. Diba?
Which brings us to the content. Kasi, in terms of the gobyerno para mag-communicate, marami kasi content na kailangan ilabas ng gobyerno na hindi controversial enough para i-take up ng private media.
Yes, and not interesting enough. Not advertising revenue generating enough.
Okay. Hindi siya controversial, hindi siya, lalo na, ano ang magagawa ng isang bagong tulay na tayo sa isang highway, sa isang barangay, para sa mga tao doon. And ba, merong sponsor na ganyan klaseng balita kung ito ay nasa private. Wala. So that's why it is still necessary. Dahil tayo ay hindi pa ganun ka mature bilang isang demokrasya. At lalo na hindi ganun ka decentralized to ating media.
Yes, look at this. Media and the press, okay, has the pride of being the fourth estate, di ba? It is the fourth entity in this entire social contract system. May government, may tao, ganyan, fourth estate sila. But sometimes in young democracies, itong fourth estate na to is blurred with the private sector, which is completely commercial or business laden, di ba? Or driven. So that sometimes the fourth estate is actually just a business-driven decision-making system on which to report and what not to report. which is no longer serving democracy in the sense of communication, but serving democracy in the sense of laissez-faire. Because it's still democratic na mamili ka na kung anong gusto mo report if it is business. But again, communication, especially public communication, is not only a business. An economic activity, it is also a function of government and the rights of the citizens under the Constitution.
Yun yung sinasabi kung papansin mo ito, pumunta ka sa ating yung isang kanila. Yung aking nakapost dyan na page that then yung aking sinasabi, I believe that I believe that the freedom of the press, the freedom of the press is not the sum total of the individual freedom of speech of everyone in the press. Okay? The freedom of the press is a protected freedom, not in the sense that freedom of each individual reporter,
of a class.
As a class, kasi sila nag-review sa press, and meron sila mga individual freedoms of speech, and then i-add up mo yan, it becomes freedom of the press. No, I don't think that.
No, everyone, I think that two miracles. First miracle is that the freedom of the press, the freedom of expression, and the freedom of speech belongs to everyone. The freedom of the press not only belongs to people who work in broadcast or in print, it belongs to everyone.
Yes,
that is in the Bill of Rights.
Because sa paniniwala ko, you will see this in Supreme Court decisions in the essence ng and even in US decisions on communications and people. You will see that the basis for protecting freedom of the press is not to protect the individual freedom of speech of people in the press, but to protect the right of the public to know. That's when you protect the freedom of the press, you want the public to know. Now, the question is that right of the public served when the decision making and the editorial decision making in the press is governed by
business factors.
Now, if we centralize the ownership and operations of media entities in the Philippines to certain players only, who are governed by their own big
money-making,
their own economic objectives to make money out of their operations. That is when we will have a problem. And that is why I see government's entry or government's participation into this entire magulo ng sistema ng media. Napaka-importante nito to protect the people's rights.
Okay. There are many distinctions and nuances. Okay. When we talk about the freedom of the press, of expression, of speech, that is talking about political law, political constitutional rights. It does not talk about classes of people like journalists or reporters or whatever. It does not talk like that. The Constitution says every person, all persons, everyone, any person, ganyan. So that's everyone. So that means you and me. We can.
That's the right to
freedom of expression, speech, press, and all this. Okay? Kasama din yan. Bakit? Kasama din kasi
freedom of expression.
Kasi yung freedoms na yan, in my understanding, is a family of freedoms to express. Okay? Even the freedom of the press is the freedom of the publishers of these things, of these news articles and opinions, newspapers and print. They have also this right, even if they were not the ones writing these things. They are the ones, the publishers, are the ones that bring the work of the journalists to the public. And they also have that specific protection, which would also extend over to the journalists that they employ. That is why yung mga freedom of the press is used to protect the publisher or a newspaper company when a person sues their journalist reporter about a news article. Usually, yung journalist will be immune, pero yung publisher ang makakasuhan dyan. And then, doon ang issue doon sa kaso na yun, and the defense and the prosecution will talk about what was their proper exercise of the power to control the freedom of the press. There is no such thing as the proper exercise of the freedom of the press. You can do it whatever you like. The question there is, does the state have the correct way of regulating some of these freedoms? Kasi there is no way to control press, expression, and speech.
The content.
There is no way to do that. You are free to say anything that you want to say. You are free to express anything that you want to express. It's just up to the state to say that we can regulate this because there are other reasons than your ego. But there are other reasons like security of the state. We can regulate this kind of speech or content.
And you cannot use that freedom to hurt
other people. Exactly.
So that's where those are liable.
But that is not a limitation. That is a regulation of a right, because still in the law you have a defense, and the defense is that I am telling the truth. Diba? So it's unlimitable right. It's an unlimitable freedom. Ang pinag-aaway, ang titimbang lang nito sa kaso in a case of libel, for example, or a false publication, is that does the state have enough reason to regulate that kind of content in this person's exercise of the freedom of speech and expression and press. So, ganun yun. Ang state ang magpapaliwanag, tama ba itong ginawa ko? I have to say, if I am the state, I have to tell the court, meron akong rason kung bakit ko ginawa yan, and I am not supposed to do it to everyone. I am just doing this for a specific kind of utterance. Like in Congress, they made a law that's called slander and libel. So there is that regulation.
So that is why one way for the market to self-regulate itself is yung balance of power. So once the media environment in the entire country is not dominated by single or two players, you will have the opportunity for the media and the media market to balance itself in terms of weight na sinasabi ng isang publisher. So yes, you will have a problem where
dalawa na lang ang naglalaro. Isa na lang
ang nagdadala ng buong discussion. So,
yes,
then yung discuss natin sa pagbabalik natin. Pero bago yan, kung tayo mag-break yung meron ako yung first day.
Sino yung mag-birthday?
Yung pumasok kanina.
Si Seven. Si Seven.
Okay.
Bakit mo sa camera yun? Bakit mo sa camera? Nandiyan ba siya?
Wala, makasi.
So, ibigan po natin si Seven.
Ibigan, pabalik ng Tambayan at pag-uusapan namin yung freedom na yan.
Freedoms.
Liberties. Okay, magbabalik po. Yung winner, break muna tayo.
Tambayan sa DWIZ. Muli nating balikan Tambayan sa DWIZ.
Hello. Kapalik po ang Tambayan. Magandang hapon sa inyo lahat. Mag-share na ba kayo? Nag-like na ba kayo? Hindi pa.
Mag-download kayo ng mga app ng DWIZ. No? Google Play Store and Apple App. And
Magpapatuloy.
Then mahalaga itong ating mga kabataan yan, very vocal sa social media. Ano yung freedom of speech and how does it affect the especially if you're a vlogger, lead discussion kasi konting oras na mga nagdang araw, mahalaga yung mga pag-usapan na pinapahaya ng topic yan. Parang with vlogging, social media, access to local radio,
Yung mga maraming tao na nag-iisip na dahil may freedom of expression ako, pwede ako magsasabi ng exclusion sa akin.
Yes, that is true.
Okay.
But you should also be aware that there are existing regulations by law na binigay sa gobyerno para protektahan ang sarili mo, ang estado, ang mga citizens, at ang private persons na maaaring maging subject ng content ng isang communication. So, siya ang history nitong itong making history lang on a very weird situation. Dati kasi ang lahat ng opinion to the public was not could not be done by everyone kasi unang-una before the invention of the press ng Gutenberg press na kung saan yun yung nagpabilis ng pag-reproduce ng information, written information. Sinusulat lang yan. Diba? At ang pagsulat at pag-rewrite niyan at pag-copy niyan ay kailangan ng pera. Diba? Na maraming sumusulat niyan. So, doon yan sa publisher, sa publishing house na tinatawag. Yan yun sila, yung newspaper companies natin ngayon. At sila, primarily, ang nagkaroon ng freedom of the press. Kasi sila nga later on, when the invention of the Gutenberg press was happened, sila ang nakabili ng mga press dahil sila lang may pera. Hindi naman pwedeng gawin yung lahat ng tao. But remember now that everyone can do this. If you have a computer and access to internet, or if you have a computer and you can type your thoughts and you have money, you can publish it in a limited manner. For example, how many copies of your book or a booklet or a newsletter, diba? Or yung panahon ng grunge era ay meron tinatawag na fanzines, yung mga short for magazine. So all the information about their favorite bands were written in these fanzines na tinatawag, and they were distributed to people in the streets, in schools, in colleges. So, nagsimula tayo magkaroon ng diversification of source of information and content of communication. So ngayon, there is now a question kung sino na ngayon ang press. And to me, since umalis na tayo doon sa panahon na ang pwede lang mag-publish ng written or spoken content ay yung may mga pera na mag-business on how to multiply or produce these things, magagawa na natin ng lahat yan ngayon. Almost everyone can do that by self-publication sa blog, or sa website, na hindi mo na kailangan maraming tao na i-employ para mag-reproduce niyan. I just write it, put it on the website, and there it is. You've already published it to the public. It can be seen by either a part of the public or the public at large. So we are now in an era where we can self-publish, and we are now in an era where everyone has the right freedom of press. So ano ngayon ang mag-a-apply ng mga regulations that formerly ay hindi clearly and distinctly nakikita na in-exercise ng karamihan ng public. At yan ngayon ang storya niyan sa mga posts, our posts on the internet, our opinions about the society, about another person or official. Pasok na tayo dyan. Swak na tayo dyan sa regulation ng gobyerno on what libel is, on what slander is, on what is false publication, and all of that stuff. But there is another kind of regulation na hindi pa rin mag-a-apply sa mga self-publishing actors. And that is yung regulation ng NTC, which is broadcast. Because technically, di ba, hindi ba broadcast ang internet? You cannot consider it as a publication in the internet. It's not broadcast because it's not free to air. Diba? It's not free for everyone. You have to have an internet access, which is a private contract with another provider of that service.
Yeah, you're
so
paying
that,
for that.
And you are paying for that. So that is not free to receive, to air, di ba? So, hindi tayo, ang mga internet content creators and publishers and self-published producers ay hindi sila covered ng NTC. Di ba?
Similarly, nakukover sila ng patakaran. Similarly, analogously, nakukover sila ng mga patakaran na applicable sa publication na ginagawa. Kasi kagaya ng print, hindi rin naman libre na makakuha ka ng kopya ng newspaper. Hindi rin libre na makakuha ka ng kopya ng magazine. But still, when you publish something on print, you are still liable for whatever lies that you publish there. So the most important thing here, are you publishing the truth? Okay? And is that truth going to benefit the public at large? Kasi there are some truths which are not publishable. Okay? Like, okay, it may be true, but
copyright. Yung di mo pwedeng i-publish later on pagka meron ng after a process yung what's this, patents, for example. Yung mga secret ingredients na tinatawag.
Illegally. Okay? Maybe true, but you got the information illegally. Hindi mo pa rin yan pwedeng i-publish.
Sa like in
private communication.
tapping, wire tapping.
Private communication. Say, for example, ikaw ay secretary ng isang tao. Secretary, meaning assistant ng isang tao. Pinasa mo yung isang silyadong communication to your boss. It may be true kung ano yung content doon. Hindi mo pwede i-publish yun. Kung ano yung content doon, no matter how damaging it is, no matter how important it is, because yung principle na from the conscious stream, will still apply here. So, information you can obtain,
even if it is true,
cannot be published.
And there is a regulation on publishing that, and therefore there will be penalties on people who will do that, like in wiretapping, in
wiretapping, communication.
On the other hand, makikita rin natin ang proteksyon ng Estado, ng ating mga batas at ng Constitution sa sourcing ng information. For example, yung protection of the source, di ba, of a reporter. A reporter has the right not to disclose the name and of the instance of the source. And that is primarily for the protection not of the journalist and of the source, but of the freedom itself. Kasi kung madidisclose yan at pilitan siyang madisclose at mamatay yung source, wala nang magsusource next time. Wala na ngayon ang magsasabi ng totoo dahil matatakot na mamatay. Kahit na hindi ang Estado ang pumatay sa kanya at another private citizen, pinatay mo yung freedom. Di ba?
Yeah, and that protection of sources in the law was expanded to cover not only the reporters, but also columnists. Columnists are not reporters. So in most cases, yung dating ng mga bloggers are like columnists. Nagpapahayag tayo ng
Bandits.
Nagpapahayag tayo ng opinion on certain information na maaaring na source natin to reports or through information that we have ourselves.
Okay. Now, ang question din on that point is that why is it, halimbawa on Facebook, that everyone is penalized or reviewed for or restricted later on for fake news or false news when they are not doing news? Di ba? Opinion din eh.
Yeah, the expression of opinion, good. So again, that is covered in a new law signed during the time of Hillary. That is a new law. That there is a very short law which said that the protection of reporters for their right to hold the identities of their
Non-disclosure
is also
enjoyed.
extended to those who are acting as or publishing as columnists or
pundits, commentators.
So, along that line, it only becomes an issue kung yan ay yung pinag-use ay pinaswaka. So, it is now a matter for you to decide gagamitin mo sa defense na hindi ko di-disclose mo source ko. So, kung makikipag-iitan ka dyan na hindi ko di-disclose mo source mo, then ikaw yung maaaring managatigan.
So, ngayon, is this anathema? In other words, paradoxical ba itong pinag-uusapan natin that there is this unlimitable freedom and yet there is that really high risk of going to jail for saying something? Okay, the answer there is no, it's not paradoxical. It is the only way to naturally sieve, di ba, ang pagsala ng impormasyon, kung totoo man yan o hindi. Because you have to understand that you also need to know false information. If only to be able to compare it or to distinguish it from what is real and factual.
Correct.
So kung wala na ang isang tao ang i-allow na magsalita o magsabi o mag-utter o mag-report ng something that could be considered false, walang mangyayari dito sa ating sistema ng demokrasya. Dahil babalik tayo doon sa iisa na lang ang source ng katotohanan. Kahit na itong source na to ay hindi siya actual source, but only a regulator. Nagsasabi, hindi totoo yan. Ito totoo yan. Yan i-restricted. Dahil hindi totoo. Itong totoo na to ay pabayaan din siya dyan mag-publish. Because you see, there is no, this body, this person does not provide a reasonable way of knowing kung itong hindi mo ni-restrict or hindi mo sinensor ay totoo ba yung sinasabi niyan. Because the fact that you are not being censored or not being regulated or restricted or stopped from uttering what you want to say doesn't mean that you're telling the truth.
But, on the other hand, titignan natin kung decide of close or publish. Ano ang advice na pinag-alala? It all boils down to responsibility.
Discipline, diba?
Responsibility. By writing this, do I help anyone? But, and secondly, what am I writing? Am I writing something that is good or worth knowing or worth considering? Kasi lahat ng bagay kailangan pasa sa sitwasyon. Let's say, for example, ako, I would admit, I was one of the first to brought up the issue
Diploma.
I posed a question na later on pinigap mo iba. And maraming research about it. And talagang kapatayin yung eskwelahan nila ng base na. Okay? That information help people decide what kind of person this is.
Or not maybe not decide on the character of this person, but only whether or not he is worth voting for, okay, for a certain position.
And at that time, he was a strong contender. Is that worth knowing? Yeah, because for me, yes. Because actually, what I posted was not an accusation that he did that better. It was magnetic who furnished the information that he did not really get legitimate diploma for political science.
But only because the school that allegedly issued him that diploma did not have the proper authority coming from a government agency. Because remember, that is no longer communication, that is no longer media or press. That is education, and the right is that right is the state has complete interest in this, and it can regulate that as much as it wants, as long as it is justifiable or reasonable, di ba? It's not like the regulation of freedom of speech, expression, and press. Ibang-iba yan. So, providing this information when it can be had, when it can be provided, is actually a good service to the public. And doing that is a good thing.
Nobody was doing that again. Okay? So, the point is, merong tayo dapat exercise.
Discretion. Yes.
Kasi, aside from those information that we get from sources, okay, there are so many stories. In my case, I heard the Philippines presidential figure, and people know it. I wasn't against him personally, but I really did not believe that he is suited to become our vice president. Okay? Aside from those issues that we raised, there are so many stories. Pero i-filter natin yan. Ito ba may patutunguhan? Ito ba may patutunguhan? Ito ba? Kasi hindi pwede lahat na lang na naririnig ka ng informasyon ay ilalabas natin.
Or i-demand natin to know. Okay. Yeah.
Ang tawag namin din sa media, kuryente. Okay? So, para sa mga brothers na Islam, ingat tayo sa kuryente. Doon papasok yung responsibility.
Yeah, but I think that bloggers, being a new phenomenon, should have been given its own right to grow and develop and discover and commit mistakes and discover its own powers and limitations, just like the press was allowed in its own time. So that we have to allow blogging, for example, or the expression on the internet. It's the only way na hindi mo pinapakialaman, believing that only the state is limited from censorship or regulation of content. And private entities do not have such a limitation. Of course not. Remember that this right to expression belongs to every citizen. And every citizen has the obligation to respect that in every other citizen other than himself. So, hindi totoo yan na hindi mo pwede mong isensor na lang kahit sino dahil private person ka naman and limitation only applies to government. That is not true. Private persons and entities also have this limitation na if you censor without justification, you have to answer to the law somehow. And what law is this? We don't know yet. And that's what I'm talking about. And we should be allowed to develop our own system and discover our own problems in this kind of discovery and development and progress of what is this new fangled way of communication, which is the internet and blogging and TikTok and whatever.
And I don't have the time of not knowing, kasi kung sabi mo ito, this is new, this is uncharted territory for every one of us. Like me, I can share my experience. Yes, I have that, but people noticed that during the campaign, I was generally silent. Why? Because I know that this is the period when the candidates are supposed to be speaking. I know not you. Want to interfere in their own speech. Yes. This was their time to show the people who they were.
Yes.
And me, nakakalitan naman ang aking following, pero yeah, I could reach 1 million readers naman. But, di ba, me interfering in that communication by the candidates, for me, is nuisance. So,
self-regulation.
Self-regulation, I do not interfere with their talk. This is their time. But before the campaign period, yes, that was our time. And now, after the campaign period, it's again our time to talk. But for me, I exercise self-restraint. But that is just me.
Yes,
I cannot say that others will talking
should follow the same.
No. Yun yung importante dito.
Ang importante dyan na everyone in a mature democracy, a mature democratic citizen must have a sense of self-restraint. And that is now the fruition of all these freedoms. Now, when this freedom is completely understood by the citizen, that is the time when the citizen knows when not to speak and when not to express and when not to publish. We should be allowed to get there by allowing us to commit mistakes. There are laws na in place kung we commit the really, really awful mistakes of libel and slander and false communication. But if only we are aware of these things and just left to our own, our own system of discovery, then it will be a better place. And there will be no restriction in Facebook and TikTok and YouTube, because again, my description of that restrictions on Facebook and Facebook fact checkers is really a business company interfering in the exercise of constitutional freedoms of countries they don't exist in.
And just ignore yung timing and then the subject. Okay. Sometimes people sometimes it's time people talk about baho ng tao. Anong klaseng baho yung sinasabi natin, expression there, pag-usapan natin. Pero alalahanin natin, permanently past the election review. And kung nakikita natin ng ating mga blogs, nakikita natin ng ating boses kung saan man, nagulusunin po tayo, lalo na kung ang mga natin natin, yung mga ibang tao,
talking about that, let me give you a distinction. Okay? The people who ran for election, they were candidates. They were asking something from you. They were asking you for your vote. As opposed to these people are now being appointed in as secretaries, as part of the bureaucracy. They are political appointees. They did not want anything from you. They were tapped by the leaders who won the elections to help them, or to help them in the administration of the government. They are not candidates. If someone is asking something from you, you have the right to scrutinize this person and say the bad things about this person so that no other persons will be fooled into voting for this guy. Diba? Pero pagdating sa appointees, that is not the case. And these people actually have more rights to sue for libel than the candidates were during the election. So be careful. Kasi kung akala nyo, pwede rin kayong magsalita in the same manner as you did with the candidates, you are wrong. You will discover this really fast when you let yourself, free and crazy and wild about that. Restraint.
Power comes.
Yes, restraint.
So exercise that becomes well, none of us are saints, none of us are perfect, and especially every one of us have sins, and that's really comes in the process. It is our duty to scrutinize. Hindi lang pag-usapan natin. So, with that, alam ko na, and we have to wait to our next program.
In the heart of business, di ba?
Yeah,
I think so.
It's a Thursday. So, sa ating mga katambay, I hope you enjoyed today. And,
sana natuto kayo.
Mga informasyon.
Congratulations sa ating President-elect at sa ating Vice President-elect at sila ay proklama na as winners of the election. So, congratulations and congratulations to the Filipino people. Thank you very much. Kita-kita tayo sa susunod Tambayan.
Tambayan sa DWIZ.